Hey guys, welcome to my end of term test video on this BMW 220i Coupe. I've had this car for the past 10 days and covered just over 500 mixed miles in it. I shot an initial first drive video on this, and if you missed that, there's a link to it up here somewhere. I go into this particular car in detail, go over its specific spec, and it's had a really good response so far, so thanks so much. A lot of people really liked the Melbourne red exterior colour and the general spec. That video is fast approaching 60,000 views and almost 300 comments, most of them really useful and interesting. And in fact, that's what today's video is mostly going to be about, is answering some of your questions that I requested during that first drive video. So really appreciate the feedback and response once again, because, well, that's going to be the fundamental ingredients for this particular video. But before we start looking at those questions and discussing those topics, I just want to talk about price, because I said in the first drive video that this represents reasonably good value at just under 35 grand for the base spec 220i Coupe with the M Sport trim. And I know going back 3, 4, 5 years ago, saying something with a 2 Series badge on it that has less than 200 horsepower, 35 grand is good value, well, you'd be crazy. But unfortunately, in this day and age, especially this year when prices just seem to be getting higher and higher and higher, it sits about right in my mind. I know it's nowhere near as fast and sporty as some other cars that are about £35,000. Let's use a GR Yaris as an example. That's 35 grand on the nose. And yes, a GR Yaris is much faster, it's much more exciting, it's much sportier than this particular car. Of course it is. It would absolutely destroy this car on the road or on the track. But the sort of person that's looking at buying a 220i Coupe is not the sort of person that's looking at buying a GR Yaris. They're two different customers, they're two very different cars. And in fact, most people that I know that have a car like the GR Yaris have also got a more practical, easier daily, if you like. So comparing apples and pears just doesn't really work when you're looking at pricing. And I'm sure there are other cars that are equally as good value, if not better value out there. But my point was that in today's market, where prices are just crazy and everything is really expensive, I think that this represents reasonably good value, especially as I'm sitting here and could almost forget that I'm in a 2 Series Coupe, because it's very much 3 and 4 Series in here. So I wouldn't feel shortchanged if I was financing or buying one. But yeah, don't get confused with me saying that this is the best bang for buck. It's not, of course it's not. It's 184 horsepower and it's 1600 kilos. It's definitely not going to set your world on fire in terms of performance, but in terms of the package, the build quality, the infotainment, it's a really nice place to be. On to the questions, and the first one is from Richard Warner, asking if I've driven the 220D Coupe. I haven't yet, Richard, and that is obviously another model that's available in the UK along with this, the 230i and the flagship M240i X-Drive. I believe the 220D is about £2,000 more retail, so about 37 grand, and that 2 litre 4-cylinder turbocharged diesel gives you 6 extra horsepower, so not much, but it gives you an extra 100 newton meters of torque. It's probably to be expected, because we all know the one good thing about diesels, or the 2 good things, are extra torque and extra efficiency. So you get 100 extra newton meters and you get about 35% more efficiency. In fact, BMW claim that the 220D will do 60 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle, and I'm sure that that would be the case, especially as they all come with the brilliant ZF 8-speed gearbox, which makes light work of efficiency. So I haven't driven one yet. It's a shame, as we know the world is slowly being pushed towards hating diesels, but the reality is a lot of the time the diesel lump is better than the petrol lump. So hopefully I'll get my hands on one very soon, and I will obviously make a video about that. Second question is from Peter Moody. Peter is a long-term viewer and supporter of the channel, and he's in fact a BMW X7 owner and lives all the way out in Australia, which is my motherland. So I hope you're well, Peter, and thanks for the support as always. His question is, what's the deal with the new exterior door handles? Are they to do with aerodynamics? Very good question, and my honest answer is I don't know technically, but I think you're onto the right thing there. I reckon they are definitely aerodynamic related. There's no doubting that they're going to be more efficient than the old style handles because they sit completely flush with the bodywork, and also it's probably just a refresh for BMW. I guess we'll start seeing them on the entire range over the next few years. It would just be a styling tweak. I initially didn't really like them, and you probably remember that from my initial M240i video, or I think it was maybe even my M440i Grand Coupe video out in Germany at the end of last year. I found them a little bit tricky in cold, wet conditions, but I'm growing to like them a bit more now, and I do think they look really smart. So yeah, let's hope they are more efficient and they do give us a better looking sort of side profile of the car. My third question is from Will Hicks 96, and in his words, it's a very yobbish comment. Does it fart on upshifts? He has a 2016 BMW 120i with the B48 and with the ZF 8-speed, I think it would have been, and his one sort of makes that sort of farty DSG fart, I always call it, on the upshifts. I don't think this car does. Let's just test it now and see, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't. It doesn't at all. I'm pretty sure that most of the B48 iterations that have got the OPF filters, they've removed that fart, as you call it. And I don't know if it's an efficiency thing or what, but this car doesn't have that any longer. So it's very smooth, very seamless, but there's no drama there at all between gear shifts. Be interesting to see if they pipe in some fake sound like they have done in my M3 with the software update. There's definitely nothing going on there. Question 4 is from Ikram, and he asks what the steering feel is like compared to the M240i xDrive. Ikram, it's really difficult for me to be honest because I haven't driven an M240i for a couple of months, and that was that black one on that rainy day. It was a very quick drive, so it's really difficult for me to say back to back, but I will get back to you about that when I get my M240i long-termer in the next few weeks, because this car will be more fresh in my mind. I want to say there's a tiny bit more feel in this car because of the lack of drive shafts, etc. on the front axle, but saying that, as I discovered in my M3 xDrive, BMW seemed to somehow retain, well, that tiny bit of steering feel that is still there in the rear-wheel drive version. But I do think this does feel a little bit sweeter than the M240i. Again, something that could be fundamental and change that is the lack of weight over the front end, over the nose. We've got a lot less engine and radiators, cooling systems, and we haven't got the drive shaft, so it probably weighs a good 100-120 kilos less over the nose in this car compared to the M240i, which in turn you'd think would give you a slightly better steering feel. Question 5 is from Vib33, and they say they wish BMW did a 230 Ti, something with 300 horsepower, rear-wheel drive and a limited slip diff, and me adding to that a bit less weight, maybe a stripped out version, a bit like the 128 Ti, but yeah, really get rid of some of that weight, bring it below 1500 kilos. Be a great little car, great little package. It would have to be priced quite aggressively. I'm guessing, you know, under an M240i, so at low 40s without options. But I think it would be a really interesting package and idea, because if it was around 300 horsepower and it weighed 1500 kilos, then its power to weight would be very similar to the heavier M240i X-Drive, and it would maybe appeal to the purist a lot more. So yeah, great idea. I very much doubt they'll make one, but if they do, then it would be awesome. And yeah, great suggestion. Question 6 is sent in by George, and he asks, is it his imagination, or does this 220i Coupe tend to sit better than the flagship M240i? Does it sit a little bit lower? And I've seen actually a few questions similar to his, and I have to say that, yeah, the sort of out of the box stance of this 220i is definitely better than the flagship M240i. Just looks like it sits a little bit lower. And he's asked if that's to do with the X-Drive setup. And I know going back a few years, when BMW put X-Drive on the 3 Series, etc., it did tend to sit a bit higher. But then in the more recent years, that hasn't been the case. I don't know if that is the case with this car. In fact, I did have a quick call with Mike from Motec earlier just to discuss if he knew, and he also agreed that visually it does look like it sits a bit lower. It might be the spec, it might be the different tyres, there's a lot of variables, but long story short, I don't know technically if it does, but it certainly looks like it has a better, let's say, ride height, a lower ride height than the 240 does. Question 7, one of my favourites, from 3795 M-Power. He said that he also has these M-stripe seatbelts in his M2, but they only give you an extra 10 horsepower, not the quoted 20 horsepower that I stated in the first drive video on this car. So appreciate your feedback, and I'm sorry that I got that wrong. These do indeed only add an extra 10 horsepower, not an extra 20 horsepower. That was a typical Joe exaggeration in the first drive video. Question 8 is from Harold in France. I love the fact that I have such an international audience, not just English speaking countries like America and Australia. It's great to see so many others. So thanks for sending in the question, Harold. He is looking at getting himself a 220i Coupe, and wanted to know what options I would advise getting on that car. It's really difficult to advise on things like colours and options for other people's cars. I get asked about it 10-20 times a day. I mean, the amount of legwork I put in for manufacturers most of the time, like BMW, helping others with their spec, etc. I mean, it's unreal, and I love the fact that people ask me, but my standard answer most of the time is just get, number one, what you can afford and justify, and number two, you know, what you need in your car, what you really want your car to have. You know, going back to sort of 2013, when I spec'd up my original M135i, I really couldn't afford that car full stop, let alone put any options on it, and I wanted things like the Pro Nav and whatever else, but I didn't end up going with all that. All I did, I think, in the end was heated seats and sun protection glass, and the all-important adaptive suspension. The adaptive suspension was the must-have. The heated seats in the UK and Dakota leather for me was a must-have, and the Sun Pro glass, in my opinion, just made that car look much better. So I kept it very, you know, stripped out, because at the end of the day, even a base one of these is a really nice car. So I've kind of gone around in circles here, Harold, but what I would suggest is just going with what you want and what is important to you, package wise. And also, being from France, you probably got different standard options, you've got different packages, etc. One thing I really would advise in these cars, because they're brilliant, is the head-up display, but I'm not sure if they're available at the moment because of chip shortages, etc. So good luck with whatever you go with, and send me a message and update me once you order it. The 9th and penultimate question is from Julian Kent, and he asks, me being so tall, didn't think I ever talked about my height in videos. Do I have any issues in the 2 Series cabin, in the front of the 2 Series cabin, I think he said? And I have to say, none at all. As talked about a bit in the first drive video, it's basically a 3 or 4 Series in here. As far as I know, it's pretty much as wide, it's just the same, it's effectively the same dashboard, very similar seats, if not the same again. Driving position feels identical to me as a 3 or 4 Series. So yeah, no issues whatsoever in terms of my lankiness, my size, my COVID width, if you like. Yeah, no, I find this very comfortable and easy to live in and live with. Also, being a coupe 2-door, the front doors are really nice and long, and in fact make it a lot easier to get in and out of compared to, say, cars like my M3, where the front doors are shorter. So yeah, real easy car to live in or live with. Where it's not so great is rear cabin, obviously really restricted headroom and legroom back there, but that's no different to the 4 Series coupe, which is really not that great in the back either. So if it's just front cabin that you're asking about, which I think it was, then no issues in here whatsoever. It's going to fit all shapes and sizes. The 10th and final question is by the Best Wanted 112, and they're asking a question relating to something that I said in the first drive video, which was, is the 230i the sweet spot in the new 2 Series coupe range? So 230i sits just above this model. Essentially it's the same car with a slightly higher tune, so you get an extra 60 horsepower, I believe, and a little bit more torque, which would really liven this car up, give it a bit more character, turn it into more of a sports car than, let's say, just a normal car or daily. But what they've said is, if I'm recommending a 230i, once you factor in the standard equipment that comes on the M240i, plus things like the standard adaptive suspension, the X-Drive B58, the brilliant B58, the 230i suddenly doesn't look like the best buy on the planet, and actually it's the M240i which does. And that's a really good point, and it's kind of always been the case. Again, relating back to when I first got my M135i back in 2013, that car represented such good value. I think it retailed at just under 30 grand back then, before options. And comparing that to, let's say, a 125i or something, I think the 125i was about 26 or 27 grand. So there was next to nothing between them, but you got so much more car in the M135i, and that's always been the case with these M lights. They throw in a lot of standard equipment, you get top of the range engine and everything else, and actually you are left wondering, well, why would I go with the 230 when for an extra 30 quid a month or whatever it is, don't quote me on that, I've got no idea, I could have the flagship model. So the long story short, the conclusion of this car, and I guess the 2 Series range in general at the moment, for me anyway, is if you've got the money, then the M240i X-Drive is the car to have. Yes, it's the fastest and probably ultimately the best dynamically, especially when you're pushing it hard, but it also gives you a lot more car for the money for only a couple of extra grand. I don't know, what is it, 4 or 5 extra grand on top of the 230i, maybe a bit more, and about 10 grand on on top of this car, but you do get all of that standard equipment. But if budget is, you know, playing a part, which it does in most people's buying decisions, especially with cars, then you can't really go too wrong. This 220i, it's not fast, it's not going to set your life on fire in terms of performance, but it's a really lovely car to live with, as I've experienced. And I'm sure the 230i, which kind of sits between the two cars, is going to fill that gap and give you a bit more performance and a bit less cost than the flagship M240i. So whichever one you go with, you're hopefully not going to be too disappointed. I think it's a brilliant new model in BMW's lineup, and here I look very much forward to getting my hands on my long-termer M240i xDrive in the next few weeks. So please leave plenty of suggestions and comments below as to what you want me to do with that car in the 3 months that I have it. Until the next video, guys, take it very easy, and thanks a lot for the support, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you at the next one. Cheers.